Today's show is sponsored by our friends at Orca Coolers, and you know it's that time of the year, so Black Friday, there's going to be deals. Cyber Monday, it's going to be 25% off site-wide, and that is, I'm telling you that normally knowing that if you use orcacoolers.com/bourbon, you're going to get 15% off your whole order, but if you wait until Monday, you're going to get 25% off site-wide. There's other deals going on. There's going to be post-holiday clearance. Make sure you go to orcacoolers.com and make it last. They have the best roto-molded coolers out there. They have awesome chasers and barrels and all sorts of good stuff. You can get the cup that looks like a whiskey barrel. It's awesome. Go to orcacoolers.com. Y'all know we've been doing stuff with Get Picks, the app. The app is great, but there is new stuff coming on December 10th. There are going to be Picks Packs. That is groups of 3 whiskeys or spirits. They have other stuff besides whiskey that you can put together in a curated box. You could try some stuff out. You could sample before you buy. You could get blind packs. You're going to have to go to the app, and that's pickshop.com. You can find out more information. You can sign up to understand what's going to come out on the 10th. You can also get the app. You can get the Picks app on there. We're working on stuff for the app all the time. We just put out a new update where you can actually see your mutual friends on the app now, which, you would think would be an easy thing, but it takes development work. So all of that stuff, go to pickshop.com, get the app, check out the Picks Packs, and I'll see you on Picks, y'all. 1, 2, 3. Hello, everyone. My name is John Edwards. Zeke Baker is on assignment, and together we make the Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for making us a part of your day. It is a awesome day. I've already been talking to this guy for 20 minutes, and I know that we hit it off very, very well, and this dude is a cool dude. He is out at Savage and Cooke Distillery, owned by renowned winemaker Dave Phinney. The distillery opened in 2018. We're going to hear the whole story about this distillery, what he's doing out there, and that is Mr. Jordan Villa. Thank you very much for joining Dad's Drinking Bourbon.
Absolutely nice to drink with you, John.
It's always, I have 3 pours. You sent the burning chair, lip service, and then just something with numbers on it that I'm very excited to try with you as well.
Yes, something cryptic. It's always, helps for the mystery of the whole thing.
I feel like when there's just numbers on it, I feel like it's a barrel, and that's always a good thing. So we are going to get to the tasting portion. No, y'all, we always are sipping on something while we're having a good conversation, but Jordan is the master distiller over there. So, it's got to be tough. He has a reputation, your boss, of being a very, very, very good winemaker. You are out in California. Wine is a very big thing. You finish a lot of your whiskey. So no pressure, right? No pressure in what you do every day.
Not really. Actually, I kind of came up in the winemaking field. I started out in Napa, which is the only reason I'm back here working with Dave Phinney. He was always one of the greatest stories young winemakers heard. We're not that far apart in age. He's a little older than me, about 4 years. He really kind of came up in a scrappy sort of way. It was inspiring while I'm trying to, just get a job on the crush pad, unloading trucks as a young winemaker. And this guy's doing it in his garage, making something of his own, and then just crushing it with his whole aesthetic that he puts together. It was really quite a bold move. And it could have not worked. It just happened to be, and he'll be one of the first to tell you this was like just the right time. People mainly bought their wines varietally. If it didn't say Cabernet Sauvignon on the label, they came in looking for a Cabernet Sauvignon. They came in looking for a Pinot Noir. They came in looking for a Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, blah, blah. But, the rules on those things, 75% of the grapes in there have to be what's stated on the bottle. And he didn't like that. He liked the wine that he drank from different countries that didn't have these kind of stringent rules and just had regional names. So you could blend any grapes that grew in that region together into these beautiful wines. And we didn't really have that kind of wine here. We had what emerged as Meritage, but it never really took off. It was kind of just like a made up name. He started doing it with The Prisoner. He labeled it Red Blend and just rolled the dice, like, give it a shot. But what he figured out is that, I'm going to put a label on this that people can't help but stare at for a minute and wonder what the fuck was this guy thinking. And it worked because they would pick it up, they would look at it. Maybe they'd buy it as like you know what, I got to have one of these, or this person's going to love this because it's so edgy, it's so weird. And as soon as they pulled the cork, and this is a major part of his philosophy, what they pour into their glass and drink has got to just blow them away. Because otherwise, you've sold them a label, and nobody wants to spend $29 or $45 for a label. If they do, they're going to leave it on the bar and be like, yeah, it's cool, but you know, you're never going to buy it again. And I had a similar philosophy with, you know, I've been at this for a long time. I haven't done anything else. Brief stint in the restaurant industry, but like I said, I moved to Napa, started studying for the MW program. Peter Marks over at Copia, which was a little center right in the middle of Napa. Ended up doing a harvest, my first harvest at Round Pond Estate over at Rutherford. Working on the crush pad under Kerry Gott, and eventually under Brian Brown. He took over for him. Made some wine with a winery in Sonoma called Anaba, A-N-A-B-A. That was fun. Got to work with an extremely talented winemaker, Jennifer Marion over there. But in the off season, found a little distillery in Petaluma, California, which is a little bit North Bay. And man, I just fell in love with it. It was the not being at the mercy of the grape, not being at the mercy of sunshine and rainfall and random fungus and parasites that would move in, and poor vineyard managers, and just all the myriad things that make grape growing, which is, you know, 80% of winemaking. That's probably unfair to say to winemakers. 75% of winemaking. I'll give them 5% more. Grains grown in in the right kind of place, they're really consistent, and we grow them in hot areas, and we dry them, stabilize them, and then making spirits out of them is just a careful process of handling them the right way. And before all of this, I studied chemistry. I do have a degree in chemistry, not a chemical engineer, but I liked repeatability. I liked being able to measure variables, record them, and repeat them by keeping all the little things we do the same. And that's what you get if you do this right. Now, I'm not saying there's not an element of surprise to it. Sometimes things happen you can't count for. There's definitely an artistic part of it, as far as, you can't just follow a procedure. And I can tell somebody my mash bill and my whole method, and they can buy the same equipment, and they make a whiskey and it tastes completely different. I've seen this happen many times.
There's a great business book, not to jump in on you, called Cake.
Yeah, no.
And I am not like a fan of business books, because I feel like you open up a business book and it's like, time management is good. And it's like, really? No shit. I didn't know that. I had to pay you $20 for that? Cool. But Cake is basically talking about how you can give everyone the same ingredients and the same recipe, and everybody's cake is going to taste different, even if you think it wouldn't. Also, like, I think when it comes to whiskey, the crazy thing in you talking about the wine versus whiskey, wine has so many outside elements that, the weather, like fungus and all that kind of stuff that you were talking about.
Everything that's outside.
Whiskey, you can get everything down to a science, but that science is only going to take it to your distillate. And then the second you put it in the barrel is the outside. So it's almost like you still have that same, like, it's going to taste, I have an idea, but it's like, okay, was it tight staves or open staves? Like, was it really getting in the wood? How long did I put it in the wood? Where did I put it in the warehouse? Like, all these other things come into play where you can control it to a point, but there's still some of that, like, oh shit moment for you, right?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. That's one thing that, is a parallel. And it's interesting coming back to wine country. Well, south of wine country, we're just south of Napa, about 20 minutes. I went off and I learned to make whiskey. After that job in Petaluma, I met some people. I started teaching classes for the American Distilling Institute, after only distilling for like 3 or 4 years. But it was one of the only ones with a chemistry degree who were doing, little things. Not like big guys were giving classes and consulting at that time. So I started doing that. I met some great guys, a guy named Brian Nolt, and moved out to Breckenridge, Colorado, and opened Breckenridge Distillery back in 2008. And we grew to a huge brand. Lived up there at 9,600 foot elevation, this little ski town where it basically snows about 8 months out of the year, and just had a blast learning to kind of hone my craft out. I did a lot of going out to Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, working with the network of people I met through the American Distilling Institute. Got to learn from some great people, had some wonderful mentors, and it was great. But after all that experience, and between Petaluma and Breckenridge and all that, I find myself right back here. I started a consulting business. I've consulted on a ton of projects. Not everybody has a consulting business, right? But I just do kind of little word of mouth stuff, and I have a pretty good alumni of clients. And I'm not going to list them off for you because that seems like not the right thing to do. But anyway, end up back here in the relative same area where I started this whole journey, working with an iconic winemaker who I respect. Never met him before. Turned out to be as good a guy as he was a winemaker, and just pioneering, kind of brave guy who went out there and put red blend on my label. And I hope you drink it. And if you do, I hope you like it. And they did. And it became such a big thing. And he did he followed that through to Orange Swift. A lot of the Orange Swift wines are not easy to categorize. They don't fall into something that you see on at least the American shelf. We have American viticulture areas, but we don't have AOCs and stuff where you could just call it Bordeaux and people know, oh, it's Cabernet, Merlot, Petit Verdot, things like that. It's there's two more. I can't remember them. I feel embarrassed about that. But
don't worry, our listeners are not going to know, so it's fine.
I know I'm talking a lot of wine for a whiskey podcast, aren't I?
I think it's interesting though, because there's a lot of correlations, and that's like, I'm finding it interesting always when you learn something new. But if you think about like distinctions in whiskey, and what you have to do to call something a bourbon, or what you have to do to call something a rye or a Tennessee whiskey or whatever it is, right? And then I feel like Dave would kind of be like, yeah, I don't like that. And he would find that American whiskey category more interesting because there's so many things that are stringent in the sense of like, okay, you have to use new charred white American oak. It has to be 51% corn. It can't go into the barrel over 125 proof, can't come out. So all those things that are there, I feel like disruptors like disrupting.
Yeah.
So even though you're saying straight bourbon whiskey and this is stuff that you have right now, the label, it's finished. And I'm not trying to like get you in trouble with the TTB or anything.
No.
But it says straight bourbon whiskey. Like it doesn't even call out the finish, so you could tell he's kind of bucking the system on things anyway, because he's going to do what he's going to do.
There was a conversation that was short-lived because of the marketing people, and I think they're probably right at this point, where we talked about making a rye whiskey, a bourbon whiskey, and our other, which is an unclassified American whiskey because it doesn't go into new charred oak containers. And he was like, well, I just call them all whiskey, and people will figure it out. They'll figure out that this one, when they taste it, like, oh, that tastes like a rye whiskey. And this one, what is that, a bourbon whiskey? And we're like, dude, I don't. I was like, I love it, Dave. And he was, I don't know. A lot of people were kind of like, I don't know. They're going to put us on some weird shelf and they're not going to know what to do with it. And then people could be like, is this a bourbon whiskey? And then, guys like you are going to be like, well, is it a bourbon whiskey? It tastes like a bourbon whiskey to me.
No, and then there's going to be all the people. It's going to be all the people that think that they're super smart. And they're going to be like, I could do the Savage and Cooke test. Can you do that? Like, and then it would be great if you use like the lip service bottle, and sometimes it was rye, sometimes it was bourbon. You just didn't know.
Oh, just mix up the labels.
Yeah. So it's just like, it's 3 different labels, and then you just kind of put whiskey in it, and whichever ones that goes in that label for the day went in the label for the day.
It could have been a really expensive failure too. So
I think you have to put, at least what it is, right? In theory, I think for people that enjoy blind tasting, which I enjoy blind tasting, we started this whole podcast in the very beginning only doing blind tastings. And then we had kids and more kids and life happened and we couldn't sit there for an hour and do a blind tasting. We needed to be able to get a 15-minute review done. So
correct.
I think blind tasting is fun. I think there's a super niche community for it, but I don't think you could necessarily scale a brand on it. But
it's all blind.
But I believe now that you have an established brand, I think it might be fun to have one label that is just like, we don't know what it is. So you have Burning Chair, you have Lip Service, and then you have one label that's like whiskey blend. It's like the Orange Swift of whatever.
Call it blind tasting. It's you just came up with our next label.
Well, I got it right now. I hope your marketing people are listening, because it's like gonna be some like horror story type thing though, but it's gotta like somebody's hands like it's a face and hands are over eyes.
That would be great. You should definitely put that in.
This is going to be in. Don't worry. This part will be in.
Well, we just came up with the future, John.
We did together.
The hottest new thing, and with yes, cheers.
I'm going to move out there. We could do this all the time. But cheers. I forgot to cheers you back. There you go. Cheers.
Cheers.
Breckenridge. Talk to me a little bit about Breckenridge before we get more into this whiskey, because it is beautiful. I was just there in March. Zeke was there in a couple times and fell skiing and messed up his shoulder. It's still messed up, but I was just there for a bachelor party, stopped by the distillery. I mean, it's a fun place, but like gorgeous country out there. What do you like more, the California countryside or the Colorado going up in the mountains?
It's kind of nice to have both, isn't it?
It is.
But living up there for, that was not a cushy project. We didn't have the guys started that, and I, was one of the partners. They brought me on for, to run the place. They put in the work, man. It was Brian Nolt, hardworking Lich. He was our kind of like social chair who evolved into being just controlling the image of the brand and the way we sold things and what we were. All of these people they were in on it. And so, they had other lives, other jobs, obviously, because none of us were, making a living off this. Well, I guess I was. But I lived above the distillery in a tiny little apartment that eventually turned into an office. It was fun. It was fun taking this brand. And like I said, starting out with a 500-gallon pot still and literally 2,000 gallons of fermentation capacity, which is all we could manage a week. So basically making, 5 barrels a week and seeing it become what it has. I mean, we've grown it to this thing, and it's, public knowledge that we since been sold on to a company, but still managed by the same people. Brian Nolt's still at the helm. The guys I trained to be the distiller, I eventually, if your distillery isn't running well, like your production line, after 8 years, you've done something terribly wrong, or you just suck at your job originally, and you've taught a bunch of people some really bad habits, like how to fail like you did. That was not my case, thankfully. My assistant distillers and the people who became along the ranks from head distiller down to, new guy intern who's working his way up. I got to train so many people, and we hired well, found the right people. Anyway, I only say all this because I was not needed there anymore. I was consulting, and I met Dave Phinney's people. They said he wanted to start this. I thought about it, talked it over with the CEO there. He said, "Hey, I'm sad to see you go, and I don't. as long as you're not leaving us for good, I would. But go do your thing if you have to do it." And I think it was for the best, because I just didn't have. We had like 27 products at Breckenridge when I finally left. You've been to the bar, you've seen the whole back bar. I was making things just to make things at that point. I think the last thing I made was like an aquavit. It was like, who wants to drink this? Anyway, Breckenridge was an amazing experience. It was such a huge part of my life. 10 years from inception to about 8 years of running the actual thing. And yeah, it was kind of my I don't know. It's where I learned to do what I do.
No, I mean, I think it's a huge part of your life, and that's why I asked about it again. I think learning, going from the wine part to the whiskey part and really getting to hone those skills and try a whole bunch of different shit. I mean, there's a thing when you say, hey, there was over 20 different things there. Well, that's just you figuring out and building up your resume and having more tricks up your sleeve. To bring it full circle, when you came to Savage and Cooke and you're starting this with Dave, and obviously Dave has an opinion and you have an opinion, how did that work? Like, did he have a vision of what he wanted, or did he say, like, I trust you with the whiskey, I just kind of want this aesthetic?
Yeah, well, as far as the packaging went, I had no input on that outside of, a few little like technical, like, hey, do we have to put this on the bottle? Can we do this? Blah, blah, blah. Dave, I'm not even going to try to step and swerve into his lane on that one, because I'm way too slow a car for that. He's got that down.
You're like, I could just tell you if it's straight, if we're putting straight whiskey on it and it's under 4 years, we got to put the age on. Like, I could tell you that stuff, but like the rest of it.
Exactly. But he also acknowledged, he's like, I don't know, anything about making whiskey, but I like what you do. I like what you made out at Breckenridge. I like what you've done with the other whiskeys you've made. And, he said, I'll leave you alone to that. And we'll figure out how to finish it together, how to make it unique to this project. But he had absolute faith in me to do that. And he always appreciated that. He didn't try to get involved with I set up all the equipment that I just took you through and showed you there, set up the whole plant, way it flowed, the recipes, everything came through me. But interpreted through him and I talking about what he wanted to do, not about the exact flavor profile of the particular whiskey, just about, I want a rye whiskey, I want a bourbon whiskey, I want another whiskey that's very uncommon, which is our American whiskey. And now I wish I'd have sent it to you, but sorry that didn't make it to you.
It's all good.
I also didn't want to come down and try to reinterpret like my own. I didn't want to make a for lack of a better term, like a Breckenridge 2.0. We've got some fairly traditional mash bills, except for our rye, which are lip service rye. But I wanted to tie in that element of what Dave's done with his whole career, his amazing wines he's made, which isn't that easy to do because, I like I said, out on Breckenridge and many other places that I've consulted with, and what you see a lot in the industry is using dessert wine barrels, port barrels, Pedro Jimenez sherry barrels, Malaga barrels, Marsala barrels, Sauterne barrels, any dessert wine in the world, because sweet wines are very forgiving to age, the barrels that sweet wines age in, dessert style wines age in, very forgiving to not getting the extraction right with the spirit. They're typically used over and over and over until they're basically neutral in their wood profile. I mean, a port barrel will be recoopered for 50, 60 years before the thing's just about to fall apart, and then it'll get sold to somebody and it comes to us. And so there's really no wood extract to worry about there. You just have the port that's been absorbed into the capillaries of the wood. That's not the case with dry wine barrels, table wine barrels, if you would. Dave makes a lot of wines, but he doesn't make any dessert wines. He only makes...
Jumping in here for a second, and you said, I mentioned this in the pregame. All the best stuff happens in the pregame, y'all, but record button does not. We were talking about, I was like, I think your salesperson took it easy on us. Your Virginia over there, she's awesome. We had a great conversation, but she's like, I was kind of nervous about reaching out to you all at first because you are such haters of the wine finish. And it's like, no, we're not haters. We want to like them. Because I like wine and I want to like a wine finished barrel. My whole take on it is that I feel like American whiskey, which is really funny because if you think about our spirit of our country, and it's always like, F you Britain, like we're even running our horses the opposite way you do just because we're not you. Like we are not them. And I feel like wine finishes on whiskey is such a cop out to Scotch, and you're just doing it, not you, but like people started doing it because it's like, oh, that's what they do with Scotch. Well, Scotch is barley and it's all barley. And it's, if you're doing a wine finish to barley, it's because you want to add sweetness. It could be dry sweetness. It could be anything, but you're trying to kind of add to that. The corn, the rye, wheat, barley, that make up American whiskey, it's sweet anyway. Rye is a little bit spicier, but I think it's a lot easier to put a good wine finish on a rye. But yes, bourbon is harder because you said, so I am agreeing with you when you're saying your job is tough, but it's also the same reason why I feel like so many wine finishes that are used are not the right ones. They're like, oh, we're just going to do sherry because that's what Scotch did. And it's like, well, maybe sherry isn't the right thing to put with bourbon.
Well, allow me to retort. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, exactly. They're interesting, sweet like sweet. It's the, classic thing of cooking fundamentals and whatnot. You can, as long as you don't overdo it, you can pair like flavors. And it's the reason that so many things are done in port barrels and sherry barrels and whatnot. Are they always the best? No, they're just the most consistent in the thing you can do. I did as I was getting into, I didn't have those barrels to deal with. And I honestly didn't approach this with saying, Dave, this is definitely going to work. I said, it's going to take a lot of experimentation. Luckily, it took us, well, not luckily, but it took us almost 4 years to build this place, which is a ridiculous building, 2 buildings from 1864, this is the most gorgeous place I've been in, let alone had a hand in building from from the beginning.
You're like, can I get a bedroom upstairs here? Like,
yeah, right. But no, it's before I get too far off of it, the dry wine finishes, they're difficult. They're hard to manage. They're very short, where some people are like, oh yeah, we put it in port barrel for 6 months, for 9 months, for a year, whatever it may be. With these, all of these finishes are 45 to 60 days. And any more than that, you start extracting tannin from the wood, because, tannin's my main culprit that I'm trying to, keep it at bay. I can't keep it out of the whiskey because it's going to get extracted. They're not charred. We char whiskey barrels specifically to denature tannin in the wood. We toast them to modify that hemicellulose layer so that we can turn, cis and trans lactones into interesting flavors. We can convert things into guaiacol, 4-methyl guaiacol, and all these things that make interesting flavors in the whiskey, but we char it at the end to denature those tannins. A lot of people don't talk about that.
So I find that super interesting, and I think that's the thing for me when it is the wine finishes, like the length of finish. What you all do kind of prepping for that and then going into the length of finish. I mean, I guess there was a lot of experimentation that you probably did and wash, rinse, repeat on how long you were going to keep it in there. How did you kind of hone it in? Was it just like, okay, I know I'm going to taste it every week in the beginning and then it's going to go to daily at a certain point, or?
Yeah, well, the initial, experimentation, we tasted it weekly, and then, daily when we got towards where we think we wanted it. And yeah, we had a few years while building this beautiful facility to get these recipes right. And Dave was right there with me, tasting things. Dave and Lauren Blanchard, the general manager, we worked very closely getting these things just right. What we arrived at after a lot of experimentation, I am always pretty confident. That's that 45 days is going to be my minimum aging. And so, but it's always a window between 45 and 60 days. And each barrel is judged independently. I mean, it's a pain in the ass for the guys in the warehouse because at about 45 days, we all get around the table. Me and, I have 4 other distillers and blenders who work closely with me. And we taste them and evaluate them. Still this is very much what Dave and I did when we developed these. He's not always around, he's very busy, but if he's there, he gets in on it too. We taste through them and is this barrel ready? Is this barrel ready? Is this barrel ready? And we kind of make some judgments. That's the art of it. The beyond the science of knowing how to separate compounds by their differing boiling points, which is distillation, as you pointed out, microbiology and fermentation, and then chemistry and distillation, turning it into something that people want to drink. We judge each one independently. And again, in the other part of this, not to I don't want to belabor that idea. It's 45 to 60 days, each barrel independently evaluated. When it's ready, we pull it literally like one barrel at a time, or, sometimes 3 or 4 barrels at a time will come, and we dump them to vat. And that's our wine barrel finish portion. Now, that's not 100% of what's in the bottle. That would be too much. We didn't set out to make wine-flavored whiskey, wine-flavored bourbon. We wanted that element to it to elevate it a little bit, but at 100%, it's all it is. So like our bourbon whiskey, I don't know when you want to segue into drinking some of this stuff, but if you've got the bourbon chair in front of you.
I've been drinking it the whole time, so we can. Okay. I have them all lined up. They're right here, just so you see them. I've been sipping on them.
Well, the burning chair, and this is so funny because it's another absolutely Dave thing. I've never had named whiskeys. I've made a hell of a lot of bourbon whiskeys. I've made a lot of rye whiskeys. And when we were doing this project, his labels define his things here. And he had names for them, the rye is the lip service. And you can see why, because you have the bottle in front of you. I know your listeners can't, but go seek one out and you'll understand. The burning chair, very and as I talk about these things, we end up just talking about them in these terms. Hey, the burning chair. What we're talking about is our bourbon whiskey, and nobody knows that. They're like, what are you talking about? What is a burning chair whiskey?
But it is, I mean, when it first came out, the funny thing about it, and I think this is what, from a marketing standpoint, makes it interesting. When you name it like that, you're not necessarily thinking Savage and Cooke. So I knew burning chair whiskey. Listen, I've had a bourbon podcast thing since 2016. I've lived in Kentucky. I graduated from Kentucky. Bourbon and whiskey was everywhere. I always thought Burning Chair was the name of the brand. So when people reached out and said, like, we want to get Jordan on with you, I was like, what's Savage and Cooke? And
right.
And I think that is logistically like the marketing nightmare, but it's a great thing too, because it's like, okay, Burning Chair, but people think Burning Chair is the brand. People think Lip Service is the brand.
Yeah, they think they're two different brands sometimes. Yeah, exactly.
Dave's labels are very understated in the sense of understated and overstated at the same time. Like they make a statement, but there's not a lot of words and it easily recognizable. Like, I mean, aesthetically from the wine to the whiskey, like there is a vibe. At the same time, it's like, you did have a branded whiskey. It was just you had Breckenridge bourbon whiskey. It wasn't Burning Chair, but it was Breckenridge. Like,
right. We didn't give them 12 different names. We put Breckenridge on everything. And, that worked for us. This has worked for Dave always. He didn't put Orange Swift on the front of all of his wines.
Yeah.
You'd see Saldo or Mercury Head or Papillon or all these different wines he made. And you had to turn it around and read the fine print, just like you do with ours, to see that it's one company.
Or, you have... I love the thing about machete is one of my favorite ones. And it's just a badass girl with a machete on the label. Like doesn't really say much, but it tells you all you need to know. 8 Years in the Desert is a great one too, but there's not a lot on that label. Like it's just funny. Like, I mean, even, Papillion just has the tattoo across hands.
Yep. We've got off on a huge tangent here, but
I think it's like a marketing. We got on the marketing tangent, but I want to know about the whiskey that's in here.
Yeah, we were talking about the wine finishes, and I was just expressing that 100% of these whiskeys don't go into the wine barrels. It's overpowering. It turns it into something that is, I can say, indistinguishable from the base spirit of bourbon whiskey or rye whiskey or whatnot. But it's more than we wanted to do. We didn't want to make flavored whiskey. So like the Burning Chair bourbon whiskey, which is a bourbon whiskey, a 4-year bourbon whiskey, 18% of it goes into Cabernet Sauvignon casks. And they're from a very big mid-Napa Valley up around St. Helena project. They only see 2 or 3 vintages before I get them. So again, they're very aggressive, French oak, uncharred, fairly well toasted. But again, when I put whiskey into them, I have to monitor them daily. And again, I feel like I'm pretty safe up to 45 days, although the Cabernet Sauvignon casks are definitely the ones I worry about the most. And as we, get between that 45, 60-day window, we're checking them daily, weekly, depending on how each barrel's developing. And we try to pull them at just the right time. And you got to be a little like a day ahead of it. I only bring all this up because they're so much less forgiving when you're dealing with wine that was in barrel that has no significant residual sugar, like a dessert wine does, a port or a Sauterne or Pedro Jimenez sherry or something that has so much residual sugar inherent to the wine that it's going to mask some of the barrel extract that you get. With these, the barrel extract really comes forward. I mean, you still get the wine elements, which is what we're trying to extract. I'm not going to say I don't want anything from the French oak, but I want to minimize it. There's a good reason that whiskeys aren't aged in French oak. And it's not just because they're really expensive, because, somebody would have played on that. These are aged in, new char number 1 limousine oak. It'd be a thing, but extracts are not conducive to the flavors. And in my opinion, I'm sure there's somebody going to disagree with me in the comments below. But
no, they won't disagree. It's your thing. But don't let me stop you if you were gonna.
No. I mean, I never knew it would be my thing. I never even thought about doing it until I met Dave. And then, looking through the portfolio of his wines, it's like, wow, these are all relatively dry table wines. I mean, this is the thing, John, to sit anywhere you want. When we were talking about earlier, can you name one other whiskey that's aged in like a Cabernet Sauvignon or Grenache or Zinfandel, something that's not specifically a dessert wine, like port, sherry?
I can name one.
Please. Which one? Taconic
does a Cabernet.
Okay.
So out of New York.
Taconic, where? Out of New York. Okay, I got to find that one and kill it. No, I'm kidding.
But they do a lot of finishes. They did an ice cider finish that was super, super good. Crazy thing about it is they forgot they did it. You know, we reached out and said, like, they do a maple syrup finished one that is great. They did a Mizu cask. They did some other stuff. So they're playing around. I love the craft brands that aren't afraid to try things. It's like, and I love when they're trying things. I mean, Taconic's the same. You're not coming in going, all right, like we're going to do a port, a sherry, and a cognac, and we're going to call it a day. You know, like I love that let's make it a little tough. And what I'm finding I will say, Virginia, don't worry, you could breathe a sigh of relief. I do like the burning chair, but I think it's figuring out the science behind it, that it's not all of the whiskey that is just going into wine barrels, and that you're methodically doing, because I feel like I can still get the bourbon coming through. My problem with wine finishes, again, I said my whole thing about what Scotch does versus what we do, but I feel like the wine overpowers the whiskey to the point where you can't taste the whiskey and it just becomes about the wine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that happens too much, and sometimes absolutely on purpose too. It's like, we're going to make something that tastes totally different from this category, and this is a way to do it, and they layer over way too much. I've been guilty of it in the past too. But, with this, it inevitably had to be subtle. Otherwise, we were going to make the texture of the whiskey just unpalatable.
And it probably pushed you to find some new things and new ways to approach, the finishing. And it's probably going to open the door in the future, because full disclosure, right? This is MGP.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, and anybody who's listening is not dumb. Like you said, it took 4 years to build out the building. Y'all just opened in 2018. Now, I will say, I saw a 24-inch column still, and they're pumping stuff up through it daily. So they are making their own juice now. But you had to start somewhere. So is this high rye MGP, low rye MGP? What do you go for there?
It's the lower rye recipe, the 21% from MGPI. One of the unique things we did with it, though, because Dave, quite frankly, could afford it, and we had the time to build this place out, I said, you know what, let's not buy 4-year-old whiskey that's been aged in Indiana. Let's buy it new make, and let's bring it to our area here, Mare Island, sandwiched between the Napa River and San Pablo Bay, beautiful little island in the East Bay of San Francisco Bay Area. And let's age it here. And I think an underrated kind of thing about whiskey is it does have a terroir. You were talking about it earlier when we were talking about the precinct. The process up to the final. This is probably a bigger conversation to be had than this, but it's batch distillation versus continuous distillation. Which, when you're making quantities, it's continuous distillation. You still have a cut to make at the end. You still have your column has run out of wash to feed. Your doubler is now in reduction phase, and you've tuned it in the day to have exactly how much of those late fraction alcohols you want in there. But when you finish it, you got to pay attention to it. Now you're in batch distillation. Now you're running a pot still. And where you cut that is one of those first artistic decisions you make. And then from there, what kind of cooperage you put it into? And from there, what are the conditions you're aging in? How well do you manipulate them? Do you let your natural environment define what your whiskey's going to be? Or do you humidify your barrel house and heat it and cool it to, up in Colorado, we didn't have a choice. It would have tasted like 3-year at 12-year if we never pumped some heat into that place. But but we did. And but here we've got 2 different barrel aging places, and I hope all of you people come out and see this place. It's an amazing distillery out on Mare Island. But we've got one aging warehouse that's, two buildings over, and we've got the main building. We decided to let this just kind of be the terroir of the place. Over there, I'm not saying we're manipulating it too much, but humidity needs to be controlled to create the kind of evaporative loss that you need, which is very important to the esterification of the whiskey as it reduces. So we encourage higher humidity in there than would naturally be ambient. And we try to, make sure it cycles some heat. In here, we're just kind of letting it go. And there's no small amount of barrels in these 2, buildings with about a 27,000 foot square foot footprint. It's going to be interesting to see what happens here and what happens here. And as you said, we are 4 years old, but we really didn't get the bugs worked out. You set up all this big equipment, then you've got about a year of just debugging it. Somebody wired a pump backwards. Somebody put a pipe going to the wrong place. You find out all these things one thing at a time. You try not to get too upset. You just fix them as you go, and you debug it from the front end to the back end. Now you're actually in production. And we got a pretty good production run in 2019. And then we were on our way in 2020, and then, COVID hit, and we thought about shutting down until we got a call from the state office saying, "Hey, can you guys make hand sanitizer?" And we did that, as many of my colleagues have done. So many of us, I think all of us did. But we did nothing but that for 2020. If I never see another drum of glycerin in my life, I'd be happy with that. But we did what we could, and we got to employ a lot of out-of-work bartenders and servers and stuff to help us bottle this stuff up. That was nice to kind of, get back a little bit into the industry. Anyway, we got through it. But the point being, we didn't make any freaking whiskey. So we have a big hole in our inventory, which is 2020. 2021 was great on building inventory. And now 2022, we have done well. So we are not going to go the route of making a little bit of our own and then blending it in with stuff we continue to buy from Indiana, Tennessee, places like that. It worked very well for us out of Breckenridge. Still does, although so much is absolutely made in house now. But for here, I just wanted to control it internally, and we didn't need to sell 1 million cases in 4 years,
which is helpful.
Like that, but we did.
Well, I mean, it's
Yes.
helpful, right? But I guess the question I have from that: did you keep the mash bills the same as the MGP that you got, and then the Tennessee Rye that you got for?
I absolutely did. The only difference will be that the grains were grown here in California. So it's nice thing about California. We've got, Sacramento Valley just an hour behind me here, and all of our corn and rye and barley is grown there. We have our own malt, but not our own. But there's a company, Admiral Malting, that's a maltster over on Alameda. I say over on Alameda because Alameda's kind of another little naval base island. They malt our barley to our exact specifications, a beautiful enzymatic distiller's malt, low flavor profile, but high enzymatic potential. And all those grains come together here and we make them. So in that sense, it will be different. It'll have, the grains were grown in a different place. Everything that was made for out at MGPI is, Iowa, Indiana grains, corn, rye, barley. So that'll be slightly different. Same cooperage. As I said, we brought it out to the island, aged it here in our own kind of wood in our own conditions. So it'll be slightly different, but I don't think it'll be that different.
Well, the interesting thing too is you talk about bringing it out there. Your distillery, I know you haven't been aging things there long, but you have some that are 3 years old now. Are you finding like at MGPI, it is a concrete warehouse, so the proof actually goes down the longer you age it there? Are you finding the same thing in your buildings because they're not? I mean, I guess the temperature controlled ones, you probably have more of a say in that, but are you noticing any proof loss in the old brick buildings that you're in?
Yeah, and I like that. I didn't. I showed you around the two beautiful. I didn't take you over to. We found a beautiful. Well, it's not beautiful at all. It looks like a juvenile detention facility, but it's entirely concrete. It was a parts building for the Navy here, and it's concrete floor to ceiling, thick, like 16 inches, and the temperature in there is so consistent. We can control to some degree the heating, cooling, whatnot, without overdoing it. We usually use air exchange from outside. We don't use, HVAC systems. That's a long-winded way of answering your question, John. I did get some distillate from the same year that was the first, what we bought that goes into this burning chair, aged out in Indiana, and they are absolutely night and day. So, yeah,
it is. And just, I know we've been talking for a long time and not talking enough about the whiskey, but proof loss is not the worst thing in the world. Your burning chair is 88 proof right now. The lip service is 90 proof. Not the worst thing in the world. You're not going to be kicking and screaming because you already kind of water it down anyway to the proof that you want it to be at. Why 88? Any specific reason?
It's where I thought it drank well on its own, and also was versatile enough to be a mixer, not being too low, not being too crazy high where you had to over dilute and kind of compromise on flavors. But I mean, if you want to hear my philosophy on that whole thing, I mean, I think reduction in alcohol, like to, evaporative loss, angel share, whatever, however romantic you want to get about it, is the right way to go. You want to lose alcohol to evaporative loss and reduce. So say you put it in the barrel at 120, 125 proof is the legal limit for bourbon. We put ours in at 120. As it reduces through aging, I would rather it go, and they don't say it can't go over 125. You put it in at 120 or 125, and then you put it in conditions that are low humidity, you're going to get water evaporation and you're going to concentrate it. And that's how you end up with something like Booker's, which is great, and it's up in the high Ricks and it gets up to 130, 120, 130 proof. That's fine. But that's why they bottle that at barrel strength. I like starting at 120, reducing to 116, 114, and then adding just a little bit of beautiful, pristine water, because you've hard earned those extracts out of the barrel over 4, 6, 8, however many years you decide to age your whiskey. And then to just dilute those out with water that hasn't aged in anything, it thins out the flavor profile of your whiskey. So I'd rather reduce my strength down to closer to my bottle strength and then just add a little bit of water and, get less product. Marketing or the accounting department would prefer me to go the other way, I'm sure.
But there's also a reason why not only do you have your reputation that's been built over many, many years in this industry, but you have Dave's reputation too, because his name's on the bottle. So it's like, the good thing is it sounds to me like your boss is not going to be somebody who's like, you know what, put a whole bunch of water in it, dilute it. Like he's going to say, do it the right way.
Yeah. We try to, control as many variables as we can, let our environment dictate a unique flavor profile. And it's a very winemaker's approach. You've got there's an essence of terroir to this thing. It's a not a used term in whiskey makers, and it sounds, super kind of pretentious sometimes. But
I do really like this burning chair. Surprisingly enough, like I really wish Zeke wasn't on assignment.
No.
And I think it's because it's not the full finish. Like it is just enough that it's giving it a little bit of fruity balance on the mid palate. I get some nice rye spice on the tongue and the lips, even though it is the low rye, but sometimes that MGP low rye will sneak up on you and really tingle. So I like the tingle I get on my lips on that. And I get, a hint of corn. And so I think with it, it's, I don't know. I mean, obviously you've perfected it, and I don't know if that's what you were trying to get at, but I am getting a good mix of the fruit, and then I'm getting a good mix of the bourbon flavor coming through as well. And I really just appreciate that. A good wine finish, my beef on it has always been like the wine should complement the whiskey, and the whiskey should not be an afterthought to the wine. So just well done. I'm super pumped.
We all agree with you here. And that's what I brought to the table, and it was a thing with talking with Dave, who's a winemaker, was like, do you want to make it all about the wine? He's like, no, it's whiskey. If you think it makes sense, let's give it a wine element. And this is, 18% is where we ended up. And I think it was perfectly subtle and humble and complimentary. And yeah, I agree with you. I think it's overdone too often.
Moving on to this lip service. So this is 3-year Tennessee whiskey. What is the mash? Because you said the mash was unique on this one.
Fairly unique. So got this from someone who was willing to put it together for us. I'm not trying to be cryptic. I'm just trying to be respectful. It's a 51% rye recipe. So similar to, actually exactly the same as what Rittenhouse does, which is one of my favorites. And I know it's a lot of people's favorites now. I don't think it was so much 5 years ago when I started talking about these people, but 51% rye, 45% corn, 4% malted barley, made out in Tennessee, brought to the island for its aging. And, we knew we were going to have multiple years to do this. So we didn't just have one batch made, we had batches contracted year over year. And I have some stuff that aged out of my program that now becomes our reserves, which I'm pointing at, which I know you can't see.
I can see it all.
Radio. The more we drink this. Yeah. But anyway, I did pull it at 3 years, not because I got impatient. I really wanted to try to retain that essential peppery spiciness we were talking about in rye whiskeys. I knew I had that buffer of the 45% corn, which is why I think a lot of people got into like Rittenhouse and stuff. It's a bourbon rye.
I mean, I'll tell you, I am in a very public breakup with 95.5 rye, and it's just the mint and the wintergreen and all of it. I mean, I have a lot of good friends that make 95.5 and that put out 95.5. It's just, I prefer more of a Kentucky rye that has, more corn and more balance. I just feel like 95.5, it's just, if I wanted to drink a pine cone air freshener, I would drink a pine cone air freshener.
I couldn't hold my tongue there. Yeah, agreed. And yeah, I think a lot of people are turned off of rye because of 95.5. It's they think that's what rye is, and we all know why. I mean, it's the easiest to find and buy, and very popular formula put into some very big brands.
And it's probably the easiest to age in the sense of like you can get a product that's 2-year rye and the spiciness on it. Nobody's going to bat an eye. Bourbon, they're like, is it at least 4 years old? Is it all this other stuff? I think you could get away with a little more with a rye, but like rye is what the country was founded on. The country was not founded on bourbon. The country was founded on rye. George Washington had a rye distillery.
No, absolutely. And honestly, bourbon is what people buy. So that pays the bills around here. But our rye whiskey, which I haven't even finished talking about, but now I'm going to go into the economics of it. We position this as, it's not the least expensive thing we make, but it's the least expensive to the public. And this ends up on the shelf, depending on where you are. If you're in New York, it's probably going to be, $50. Actually, I think it's about 40 there. Anywhere else, I'm talking about Manhattan there, by the way. And I love you, Manhattan. In most of the country, it ends up around $32 to $36. Like we're trying to get this, as opposed to our Burning Chair bourbon whiskey, which is around 50 most places, 40 to $50. And we tried to make it something that, people would take a chance on. Dave gave it a cool label. And again, that's about as far as I'm going to go on freaking price, because now I have to hate myself.
No, it's, I was going to, if you didn't bring it up, I was going to bring it up, at least by me, where I am in Tennessee.
Yeah, you're in Tennessee, right?
So
I'm going to be in Nashville next week, by the way.
I know, they were saying something about it, so maybe we'll talk after. Savage and Cooke, the lip service rye whiskey, is $33. If I were to do it drizzly right now, so if I were to get it delivered to my house, it's $33. Burning Chair, I think, is $55, and Second Glance, I think, was $40. It's still, and that's the thing, I think that category from 30 to 60 is a category that is being overlooked right now, that needs, there are so many of these bottles that used to be 50 that are now 80, 90, 100. When people are looking at what am I going to do for a drinker, it's like I'm either going to go up to Kentucky, I'm going to buy a shit ton of JTS Brown and Dant, and I'm going to come down, and that's, those bottled and bonds are going to be my drinkers. Or you got to find something that is, like this lip service rye for $33 is a damn good rye. Tell me about what you finished it in as well.
Yeah. 3 years in char number 3, New American. And I've got a pretty consistent bent to my whiskeys. I'm not trying to create, as a chemist, too many variables. I know what I want. Char number 4 for some things, for some specialty products, but my bourbon and my rye are both done char number 3, medium plus toast, the underlying toast, charred heads. I don't want any raw wood touching the whiskey. So 3 years in that cooperage. And then I transfer, as I said, 18% for the bourbon whiskey, 25% for this one, because I wanted to layer over it with a more subtle wine finish, which is our Grenache finish. Grenache, it's a very common grape in the world. This particular one comes from a little project of Dave's out in Morey, France. And I get the barrels over here. We kind of swell them again, and they just have this beautiful floral kind of blueberry light. Nothing as intense as the Cabernet Sauvignon barrels that we put the bourbon whiskey into. But, and again, talking about that window of aging, these trend more towards the 60 days, and maybe sometimes just a few more, because they're well used, 5, 6, sometimes 7 vintages in those before I get them. And then we didn't want to make it a wine flavored rye. I think it's still rye. What I wanted to do was retain the spiciness by not over aging it in new oak, and then pull back some of those sweet, more floral kind of fruit notes in a finishing process. But I knew that to do that, I needed to pull it early, which, necessitated an age statement. It would have been much easier to leave it in the barrel for 4 years, not put an age statement on it, and not have to worry about some of these other things. I could have gotten the barrel sweetness, but I wanted to hold back on the initial barrel sweetness because we're already making a high corn rye recipe. I didn't want to make it too bourbon-like. I wanted to still make it rye-like, backload some of those fruit characters, some of that sweetness from the wine finish. And I sound like a crazy person who just overthought this thing for too many nights and sat up drawing fucking symbols on a glass window and came up with the world's most complicated rye formula. But that's kind of who I am.
You kind of had to beautiful mind it.
I did, at least in a completely acting Russell Crowe sort of way, and not the real guy. I don't know.
But you described it beautifully, and I'm not trying to and I appreciate that. I was just going to say, I love the fact that I still get a ton of rye spice on this, even though that Grenache is in there. And you described exactly what I was thinking in such a better way. So thank you for that.
Okay.
But I think
absolutely.
I think you killed it with that. And you don't understand. I am kind of at a loss for words right now because I have not found wine finished whiskeys that I'm excited about. And then you throw the price on top of this and I'm like, oh shit, I think I just found my wine brand. My wine finish brand. It's my hat's off to you. You really did a killer job in the sense of retaining the whiskey with the wine. And that's all I ever wanted. I feel I'm just a guy waiting for my whiskey to have a little bit of wine, a little bit of whiskey. You cracked the code.
Well, thank you. At least not, hate wine finished whiskeys because they've been done in a subtle way where you can appreciate it and say, yes, that added something. It didn't just become the whole thing.
Yes. And last but not least here, we have...
Yeah, that's why I sent you a rye sample because,
Oh, I get it now. 114.3 proof. What else can you tell me about this one?
Interpreting it, I don't take the TTB alphanumeric system when I name them internally, but 1812 are not too hard to interpret. 2018 December rye. It happens to be Drew's. What's the proof say on yours? I do each bottle. Drew's 116.3?
114.3.
114.3. See, I kept the stronger stuff for myself. Each one is an individual barrel lot. This is something we do for our single barrel program, but it is from directly in the same area, maybe one level up in the ricks. It's so funny. The rick houses, I've been at this for 15 years now, and it's always rick houses. And these guys have almost got me calling them cellars again because they're all winemakers. What's in the cellar?
You're it's up. It can't be a cellar if it's up.
Yeah, and what ABV is this? It's it's at divide by 2, 40, 44. Just talking proof, and it's a rick house. Anyway, just being funny. So anyway. This is not finished in the Grenache barrels. I just wanted you to know what the pure expression, and again, almost 4 years. I wanted to send you what's primarily in the bottle, 3 and change. And just so you had a baseline for the rye.
No, I appreciate it. And it's good.
It's intensely spicy. I know that. If you hit it with a little bit of water, it'll roll that back a little bit. I wanted to send you a barrel sample in case you want, everybody wants high octane these days.
It was a nice nightcap to cap off the good conversation. And I'm just pulling for you guys. I want to go out there. I know that's a lot with a 6-year-old for me to just leave and go to distilleries all around the country. But one day, maybe next week, we'll get to have a drink, all that other good stuff. Jordan, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure. Thank you for turning me into a believer for there's hope for wine finish whiskeys. You are welcome on this show anytime you want. So, doors open, all that good stuff. But thank you again.
Absolutely. It was good having a drink with you, spending a couple hours now. Looks like by my Dicker, talking, and thank you for. Glad I changed your mind a little bit. Be cautious. Wine finishes aren't always done well, but I hope you keep liking ours. And thank you to all your listeners. If you get out there and give it a try, I'd appreciate it so I can keep making it.
Go to savageandcooke.com, and that's Cooke, Cooke. They are on the socials and all that fun stuff too. You can find us on Facebook at Dad's Drinking Bourbon, Twitter at Bourbon Dads, Instagram at Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Please leave us an open and honest review, just like we leave open and honest reviews about the whiskey we drink. And we're here in Nashville, Tennessee. Cheers.